Hello, everyone. As you can probably tell or not tell by my outfit, I am Vampire Minion Rochelle, and I am returning to do another video for this month of October. So hopefully it's a good one because we're going to be discussing the sort of king of all vampires, in particular a film that revolves around the king of all vampires, Dracula, the 1939 film, 31, film. Uh, and this one is particularly well known as being part of the Universal Studios monster series. And again, we are going in order. We started with The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Then after that, it was The Phantom of the Opera. And now we are entering a new stage, actually, when it comes to these films, because the first two films that were discussed by previous Minions was silent. But now this is the first talkie of the series of these monster films. And it has a lot of interesting and unique aspects to it. First off, although it is technically an adaptation of the Bram Stoker book, it is a fairly loose adaptation, to say the least. It follows certain elements within the book. Like, for example, the characters are primarily the same. But the variety of circumstances in which the plot unveils itself are rather different and take different angles as far as how they sort of express the story of Dracula. And basically, within this version, you see how this man named Renfield comes in contact with Dracula within the way beginning of the story, and how eventually he becomes a slave. And you'll see how Dracula actually makes contact with the primary main characters that are within the book, that are also within this adaptation. This includes Mina, Lucy, John Harker, Van Helsing. So the way in which Dracula is not only introduced, but also kind of presented throughout the story is a little different from the book. But largely the premise remains the same, which is basically to destroy Dracula. And you'll see in how the heroes sort of do this. And what's really, I think, a standout as far as this adaptation is concerned is the fact that the man that plays Dracula, the actor, is really really good at playing Dracula. He offers a very interesting and unique take. A lot of adaptations have placed Dracula as fairly young, almost suave in certain respects, but here, although he is fairly sophisticated, he sort of maintains this very kind of menacing and controlling approach to the character. You'll see at one point how he sort of, hypnotizes people. You'll see how he has these very powerful stares throughout the film, and he really does give off that character well, especially with his accent and just the way he's sort of introduced. You feel that there is a certain amount of mystery associated with him too. And although he does follow certain kinds of rules that you would expect Dracula to follow, the way in which the actor portrays the character, I think, largely works to the film's advantage and gives it a rather unique approach, because I think a lot of the times, in particular within a lot of films that are centered around Dracula, they try to put in some very overly centralized energy, and I felt like with this character I saw more of the horror, the the mystery, the intrigue. I think largely primarily because the actor just plays the ultimate character of Dracula so well, as opposed to a lot of other adaptations that I've seen over the years where they kind of try to give him this very sort of pretty boy appearance, but he doesn't really live up to the essence of the character, so to speak. And here it's really well done by this particular actor. And you really do feel how intimidated all of the protagonists are, and ultimately the way in which Dracula is revealed and how he is sort of taken down is rather different than other adaptations that have been done before. And he has all of the various traits that you would expect from a vampire, in particular Dracula, like not having a reflection in the mirror, being afraid of sunlight, not stake through the heart. That's another thing that comes up. So they do really stick to the lore within this particular adaptation. And also the protagonists are also fairly likable as well, for the most part, although largely this story, I would say, is primarily plot driven and not necessarily too much of a character study. Other Dracula, I think, adaptations have really focused on hinging in character development, but here there's not a huge amount, and it more so follows the mystery and the task at hand, which is basically to defeat Dracula with the help of Van Helsing, who is the scientist that is behind understanding, in particular, vampires and Dracula himself. So that's though I think really all I can say about this film without really giving too much away. It is rather fascinating, and it does offer a very eerie and interesting interpretation, and I think it's definitely sort of stood the test of time. In particular, I think this Dracula, at least the actor, has been, I think, used more often than not. So it is, I think, a fairly recognizable adaptation, although I think over the years it may or may not have been overlooked by today's audience members of various film circles. But yeah, it's a really an interesting work, and overall left a good impression. And not only Dracula, but also all of the other cast does also a fairly good job. In particular, Reinfeld, especially when he does get possessed and sort of used as a slave. Renfield, excuse me. Hard to pronounce these names. But yeah, I think though that's really ultimately though all I can say about it without really giving too much away. It's pretty straightforward as far as a adaptation is concerned. It doesn't try to push the envelope, I think, too much, but at the same time it does offer the sort of basics of what we come to know of as far as Dracula is concerned. And it presents something that is actually rather unique because it does go back to sticking to the basics, so to speak, as opposed to trying to push the envelope and doing other things with Dracula that you'll see oftentimes in a lot of more recent adaptations. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say. Again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And this is my video. Feel free to check out my previous video that I did last year. But hopefully I can come by next year. And I wish the next minion luck. Goodbye.